So welcome, Victoria Jenkins, CEO and founder of Unhidden, an adaptable clothing brand that caters to the needs of people with disabilities. Also the first ever adaptive brand to become a member of the British Fashion Council, recognised by Vogue Business 100 Innovators and recently named the second most influential disabled person in the UK by Shaw Trust. Victoria has been a true pioneer in the adaptive fashion space, and I'm absolutely delighted that she's joining us today and sharing some of the insights that she's drawn along the way and is getting ready to share with us today. So thank you, Victoria.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. You've mentioned in interviews previously that it can be a struggle to get financing for adaptable clothing. And I want to ask you a twofold question. Why do you think that that's the case when it's such an untapped market and the demand is obviously there? And then how, in your opinion, can mainstream fashion be more inclusive and fashion forward so it stops feeling like it's a niche when it is so big and should be mainstream?
Yeah, okay. So I think the reason it was so hard, I think in particular for me, is because this is still such a new area. You know, there's not an awful lot of comparative data. There's not many brands. There's a few brands, but not many in the UK. There's quite a few in the States, a fair few in Australia. So I think it's that kind of, it feels like more of a risk for retailers at a time when retail is sort of in a bit of a period of flux. You know, there's all the influencer marketing that sort of changed the game and how brands do market and sell things. Then there's the high street is completely changing, and obviously there's a cost of living crisis. So all in all, I think people are less likely to gamble on retail things generally. I think my struggle to get financing was more around the fact that I was walking in as a woman was problem number one, because I think for every £1 raised through VC funding, 1p goes to women. So we don't get that much investment. And then we don't have the full data on disabled entrepreneurs, but it's less than that. So, you know, I actually started when I was pitching, I stopped taking my stick with me to some of them because walking in visibly disabled was an instant switch off. Like you could feel just the energy in the room would change. And that it just felt like that helped to some degree, but there's still, I think it was just because it was a new area, people are afraid of it, people don't know the right language, and because they don't know the right language, I think they were scared to ask the questions or worried they're going to offend me in the same way that they wouldn't be worried if it was just I'm starting a fashion brand.
Yes, yeah.
Have sort of this built into it.
Yeah.
And the second part of your question was how retailers can help. So I mean, the mission is to get it onto the high street and to get it at the accessible price points. That is the challenge I've had the whole time. Because I'm a small brand and trying to do it ethically, I haven't got the resources and the power of resources to make things in, you know, in volumes that therefore brings things down in price. So that's been the challenge. But I think what retailers can do, and what I think some of them are starting to do, I don't know if you've seen, there is a very big high street retailer that has just done adaptive lingerie, and I'm sure they're going to be looking at moving into clothing. So I think what they should be doing is working with adaptive designers, because, you know, you can bring people with disabilities into the room and ask their opinion, but, you know, you could meet 1,000 different wheelchair users that would say 1,000 different things about what they want from their clothes. You need someone who actually knows exactly what does need to happen to the patterns for it to work. So people that have that knowledge is adaptive designers that are in the space. And there are, I think there's more, you know, there's a few of us that all would be happy to partner or do collaborations. So I think they just need to engage. But I think before they even start to think about that, they need to start thinking about how they present themselves digitally and in the real world. You know, are they even working with disabled models? Do they have anyone with a disability working for the company? What have they done on their inclusive work? Because that's a huge problem to start with. You know, if you don't know the language and you haven't done the work, the chances of you screwing it up, and then, you know, this community can be a little bit ranty. So if you come out with something and you've not done it right, you will be told in no uncertain terms that you've done something wrong, which I think also does put retailers off. Like I've seen, you know, the reaction to retailers doing something inclusive and the community sort of being really unhappy, and you're like, well, they're doing something. Something is better than nothing. But I think there needs to be open channels of feedback, and I think retailers need to understand that they're so late to the game that they're going to get a lot of pushback no matter how they do it, and they just have to be okay with that.
Yeah, I hear you. So there's pent-up demand, but there's also expectation at a high level now, which from what you've said sounds like it can be relatively easily resolved by just making sure you have the right team and influencers and people involved who genuinely understand what's required, rather
Yes,
than
I think
just
so.
treating it as another sort of, this is another little piece of the retail puzzle. It needs to be
Yeah, I think that needs to
incorporated.
be consistent. I've seen brands sort of, get really loads of PR because they've used one disabled model in a campaign.
Mm.
And I mean, it used to be the case that they'd use them in a campaign, but that imagery wasn't then used on the website. So they didn't really mean it, and it was an exercise in marketing. And while to some degree, I think tokenism actually can help, because if they work with one person once, they may be open to working with another,
Mhm.
which then sort of leads into naturally they do, but that's not always the case. But I think, yeah, they shouldn't be doing it to chase PR and, sort of get thanks. Like, you're not going to be thanked for crumbs and doing something poorly once. So I think consistency is key. Like, if you do it in one season, you have to do it every season. The same you would with curve and ethnicity and age and gender. You have to start bringing ability and disability into that too.
Yeah. So there's an argument for you can't flirt with this and be superficial. If you're going to do it, you've got to commit to doing it and do it right and do it long term. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That makes-
Absolutely. I think I found a really interesting stat, and that was that while 15% of consumers have a disability, which is a huge amount of people,
Mm.
73% of consumers have a touch point with disability. So it might be that they have, grandparents, loved ones, friends, family, colleagues that have a disability. So when you look at it in that number, people are going to be more loyal to a brand that does actually care and does do the work on including everybody. And I don't just mean disability. You're going to find people from marginalized communities are more likely to buy from a brand that has centered them and has worked with them and champions them and very clearly does that,
Yes.
rather than one that doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's only a growing community, right? Because the nation is growing and longevity is increasing. So, yeah.
Exactly. And then if you even think about, broken arms, broken legs, temporary disability, you might have, an illness, and you get better, but while you have it, you want to have those access to products that would help you feel better, and not just clothing. So yeah, and yes, like you say, there's, we're an aging population, so that always comes into it in terms of mobility. And even, we look at conflict zones tend to add and swell the ranks. The pandemic was a mass disabling event as well. So and again, also climate change also tends to impact marginalized communities first and also create them. So all in all, it just made it like, it's not just the right thing to do. It does make financial sense as well.
So if that's what retailers can think about, more broadly, business leaders more generally, because obviously I'm a leader and I'm in my own right, and I'm learning just through having the conversation. What can the rest of us do that would be most helpful and supportive in making this just feel very ordinary in a lot of ways?
I think, there are so many organizations out there that have, their whole business is to help businesses and leaders do this work properly. So, and it's not, you can't do a workshop once and then that's it, you're done. It's
Mm.
constant work. It has to be built in. I think also how you kind of have to start from the ground up, right? So you have to look into your own business and what your plans are, the physical spaces, the digital spaces, and getting those elements right. And then sort of then looking at how you communicate with outside, like not just internally, but outside. How are you communicating? How are you making disabled people feel included? So an easy one is like just how you write your, like an HR, a job description or job brief. If you say, we do accept reasonable accommodations, we do allow flexible working, there's a few things that will signify to a person with a disability or a chronic illness, I'm safe to apply for this job. It doesn't mean me actually being open and honest is going to lose it. Because my whole career, if I'd have ever said I'm disabled, they wouldn't have looked at my CV at all. So it was, and bear in mind, I'd had a couple of jobs before I got sick, and then I just said I was chronic sick because I wasn't used to using the word disabled either. So, if that had been there, I wouldn't have been hired. So I think it's making it really clear that you would be fine. And also, sort of saying we can give you transcripts of the interview, changing the interview process, because someone who's neurodivergent might want to know in advance what the questions are. I think putting people on the spot in an interview scenario, I don't think everybody performs that well when you do that. So I think, we have to really look at how the systems we already have in place and how we can change them to make them better. But yeah, before you start trying to bring other people in, have a look at what you've already got and what you need to do.
Mm. And are there examples of to point to where this is being done exceptionally well, or are we all on a bit of a continuum?
So, you're like, oh, I don't know who's doing it well. And I always get asked this, and I'm like, oh, the companies that are disabled led are probably doing the best at inclusive hiring practices. But I think you can have a look at, there's a company called Business Disability Forum, and they interact with a lot of people. There's the Valuable 500 that have 500 corporations that are committed to getting disability into C-suite. And I think that's quite key. But it's still, the data and how we collect data on disability is still, it's not great, it's not perfect, it doesn't capture everybody. And then you have to think about, there's still so much stigma around disability that not everyone who is disabled identifies or uses the word disabled. And then people with learning disabilities, are they being asked these questions? And then there's also the assumption that everyone has access to smartphones, computers, and to use them all at the most, the sort of fast-paced world that we live in. There's just so many bits to tap into it, which is why I don't think the data is really there to make it easy. Obviously there are people trying to work on this and collect this, but it's kind of a multi-pronged approach. So it's really hard to say that anyone's doing it really well.
Yeah. Yeah, opportunity for all of us to learn more and do more, which makes perfect sense based on where we're today. Yeah. We've talked about, so that's kind of business leaders and what companies can do. I wanted to drill down a little bit into kind of products and services and different industries. So we already touched on data, like tech and technology is obviously a massive and wonderful enabler if it's used in the right way, and design as well. So give me a sense of how it can expand beyond what we're already doing and use other mediums and forums to best effect.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of the tech and assistive tech that we have, it was originally developed for people with disabilities. Alexa and Siri was all done for people with disabilities. How we design traffic lights was done for for people who are hearing or visually impaired as well. So there are so many bits and examples that are something that was developed for one community that works for everyone. But I have seen some absolutely incredible companies in the last couple of years because of the work I do. And there's one company who, I think their sort of tagline is life subtitled. So you walk around and it will give you a transcript on glasses in front of you if you're deaf, essentially, which is amazing. And then there's another pair that it sort of live translates British Sign Language into caption and text, because not everyone can learn British Sign Language because it is quite expensive. And not everyone uses it. And it's also, we should be teaching it in schools. So until we get to that point. I think those are incredible pieces of tech that, and then you have to think about AI. I get asked about AI a lot. It does save time. And I think time is probably one of the things that really impacts the disabled community's user experience of life. It takes us so much longer just to leave the house, so much longer to get dressed, so much longer to find somewhere to go, so much longer just to travel, because, we can't always just get on a bus and get to the venue. We get to the venue and it's okay to get in. So in that respect, I think AI has been a bit of a game changer. And I know it has been for a lot of people with disabilities, a lot of advocates, people that use copywriting or have cognitive impairments. It's really, really helped. But obviously it has its drawbacks. We don't know what this AI is going to go off and do. And I think from what I've seen already, especially in terms of imagery, is it doesn't know how to talk about disability. It's not doing that well. We've tried to write captions for Instagram posts and they're garbage. They don't really make any sense. So we have to rewrite it. So for me, I'm not finding it saves me any time, because I don't think it's got the right language, because potentially not enough people with disabilities are using it for it to learn from. And I still think it's very, much like the algorithm, it's being fed by what are people looking at the most, and that's how it learns. So if people aren't looking at the same thing all of the time, it's going to really struggle to learn. And in terms of fashion, goodness me, when I just typed in AI fashion model, you were like, is AI male? Because there was just the pictures, I was like, wow, it was just huge breasted, tiny waisted, mostly white women. It was absolutely, I couldn't believe that's how quickly AI has learned already what to do. And we've seen, the problems with deep fakes and so on as well. But to come back to, I think AI can be a really, really good tool, especially when it's integrated into other platforms. But there's so many, I'm really excited for tech. But I think, you know, it's the problem we have with any of these things, apart from AI potentially, is assistive tech is always more expensive. So the disabled community already spends, it's gone up. It used to be £583 a month just to exist. Cost of living crisis, I think it's made things worse, especially in terms of heating and bills. So if we've then got to pay more to have access to these products than everybody else does, you know, like with add-ons for computer tablets and laptops and gaming stations, you know, you have to get a different sort of keyboard, and they always cost an awful lot more. So I think some of these tech developments they run the risk of being another like something life-changing, but they cost more money for a community that's 50% more likely to live in poverty.
That's such a big thing to talk about in its own right, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's, as you say, not everybody wants or is in a position to be able to have the kind of conversations that you are. So it's wonderful that you are, and I feel really privileged that we've had one today. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for speaking to me. It's been lovely.